So our first speaker is Keith Frankish. So Keith is an honorary professor in the philosophy department at the University of Sheffield, a visiting research fellow with the Open University UK, and also an adjunct professor with the Brain and Mind programme at the University of Crete, also the editor of the Cambridge University Press series Elements in Philosophy of Mind, and has recently done a lot of work defending this view of illusionism, which we've been hearing a bit about over the past few days. So Keith, you finally got a chance to defend it, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the ethical implications of illusionism. This man here, he's an illusionist, and the woman, she is under the impression that she can disabuse him of his belief in illusionism by giving him a slap. What he believes as an illusionist is that experiences don't exist, that pains don't exist, and she thinks that this will convince him that he's wrong. Now, there may be all sorts of things wrong with illusionism, but that won't convince him. And I hope you'll see why that won't convince him. Let's begin with this. This is a quotation. I mentioned it to one or two people already. It's from Paul Brock's neuropsychologist, a wonderful book called Into the Silent Land. It's case studies in neurology. Fascinating book, which I strongly recommend to you. The illusion is irresistible. Behind every face there is itself. You see the signal of consciousness in a gleaming eye, and imagine some ethereal space beneath the vault of the skull, lit by shifting patterns of feeling and thought, charged with intention and essence. But what do we find in that space behind the face when we look? The brute fact is there is nothing but material substance, flesh and bone, as flesh and blood and bone and brain. I know, I've seen. You look down into an open head, watching the brain pulsate, watching the surgeon tug and probe, and you understand with absolute conviction that there is nothing more to it. There's no one there. It's a kind of liberation. Those last words are the most important ones in that passage. The challenge for us is to accept this reality, understand this reality, and reconcile this reality with our deep convictions about the meaning and importance of human and other animal experience. And I firmly believe that that can be done, and that when it's done, it is actually liberating. This isn't a bleak perspective at all. Properly understood, it is a liberating one. And if there's one thing I want to get across in my work, it's that. Okay, so let me just begin. I want to talk about the ethical implications of illusionism, because some people think that the implications of it are terrible. I, as you just indicated, think the opposite. They're benign and do life enhancing. But first I need to explain to you what illusionism is. I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to do it in a caricature of one. But it is a caricature. It's less of a caricature than the one that the woman with slapping the illusionist had, but it's still a caricature. And I would need more time to tell you. And I will do it by introducing another caricature, which illusionism is the denial of. Okay, so I'll introduce illusionism. I'll discuss whether it has negative ethical implications and suggest the positive ethical implications of it, and conclude with a little message introducing illusionism. This is the caricature view that the caricature of illusionism rejects. Cartesian theatre. I guess a lot of you will know that face from Dennett. 1991 book Consciousness Explained. That's what it means. A place in the brain, in the mind-brain system, where it all comes together, where all sensory information comes together, where it's pooled, consciousness happens. Okay? It has three elements: a show on the screen, a subject that's experiencing the show, and an epistemic relation between them. I will say more about these in a minute. It's a metaphorical picture. I don't think anyone thinks there is literally something like that in their head, but it's a powerful metaphor, which has a grip on our thinking about consciousness, even among people who would utterly disavow that picture or anything like it. It still has a deep intuitive grip on us. And that's why I'm doing it in this caricature. It's all to highlight this picture. As Dennett says, the persuasive imagery of the Cartesian theory coming back to haunt us. Lay people and scientists alike. He calls it the Cartesian picture, of course, because in Descartes' picture, the subject here is the immaterial soul, and the place where this happens is the pineal gland in the center of the brain, the only structure of the brain that's not, as Descartes thought, dual. It's a central locus where all sensory information is channeled and broadcast to the immaterial soul. And I refer to people who are in the grip of this picture as phenomenal realists or just realists. Again, painting with a very, very broad brush, caricaturing. So the elements of show there on the screen, consisting of mental qualities corresponding to the worldly properties perceived. So there's the yellow, the egg here, right? And then there's the mental yellow displayed in the Cartesian theatre, which corresponds to it in some way. The problem of how it corresponds to it is exactly the problem of psychophysical harmony that Philip talked about earlier. Names for these qualities: qualia, what it's likes; phenomenal properties, what it is likenesses. It's undoubtedly appropriate to talk about what experience is like. People in the grip of this picture want to rareify that talk and say that it involves acquaintance with what it is likenesses, which are displayed on this screen. These properties are said to be intrinsic, in the sense that they're distinct from informational and reactive processes. And they're said to be private, in the sense that only the subject has direct access to them. Of course, these things are informational and reactive processes are not private in that way, they're public, they can be publicly detected. This show is for the subject only. We can try to describe it to us, but we can never detect it directly ourselves. Subject, this next element. Nature of the subject is not always made clear. I think one is, and indeed some people, some phenomenal realists would deny that we need to posit one, but who's the show constitutes what it is like for us to be in our current experiential state, and got to be like it for some. There's got to be someone to appreciate what it's like. I think it's at least implicit in all this talk. There has to be some kind of subject. It's supposed to be subjectivity we're talking about after all. Arguably, it's distinct from the organism considered simply as a biological system. After all, as a biological system, how could the biological system detect this private show any more than the experimenter's instruments could detect it? Maybe it's an aspect of that system, and that system somehow inspecting its own intrinsic nature. But anyway, the third element is an epistemic relation, and this is absolutely central to the Cartesian picture. So it's called acquaintance. It's supposed to be a very special kind of relation. Immediate, certain, essence revealing. It reveals the true nature, the fundamental nature of these qualities that constitute the show, and thereby reveals that they are not informational and reactive processes. This claim, this positing of acquaintance, is absolutely central to the phenomenon. And it's very unlike the relation between the organism and the worldly properties. That relation is not immediate, it's mediated by all kinds of mechanisms. It's not certain, it often deludes us, and it doesn't reveal the essence of the things that it tell you what they really are. But this relation, this inner relation, does. And so, this is your Cartesian theatre, this is what your Cartesian mind really knows, this is what you can really be certain of, and everything else is dubitable. Sometimes the relation, the acquaintance relation, is taken to be a fundamental one that cannot be explicated in any simpler terms. Okay, so that's the Cartesian theatre picture. And as I said, I think that picture has a grip on the thinking of many people, including many who would reject it, would say that they reject it. think it's deeply embedded in the way we think about consciousness. And that's why I like to talk about illusion. Because illusions are deeply embedded in the way we think about it, the way we perceive the world. More a liar illusion doesn't go away even though you know it's an illusion. This image doesn't go away even if I can convince you that it should. It will still keep a grip on you. So what's the illusionist alternative? Well, let's take this experience of pain that the critic of illusionism is using this experience as a way of refuting the illusionist. Now, okay, so let's take the Cartesian picture, the realist picture. Okay, so there's the physical slap, and then there's some sort of mental slap, the mental quality of pain, the mental quality of pain that is appreciated by the subject, okay, in Cartesian theatre. Well, you guess by now illusions deny that there's a Cartesian theatre. Mix of empirical and a priori arguments for that. Read Dennett, just go read Dennett. You know, I've said a little myself, but you know, it's all there, and people think that Dennett's problem with the Cartesian theatre arises from a commitment to physicalism. It doesn't. I mean, that's in the background, but that's not the motivating thing. It's the acquaintance relation. That's what all his arguments focus on. But there couldn't be that kind of relation. Look at Quine and Clavier. It's all about knowledge of mental qualities. It's all about undermining that acquaintance relation. And once you do that, the Cartesian theatre has to go. And once the Cartesian theatre has to go, so does the show. I mean, what else could qualia be if not a show in something like a Cartesian theatre? I mean, there's all sorts of things you could give the name qualia to. Sure, all sorts of things are happening that you might choose to use that name for. That's fine. But if you're not building in these commitments to acquaintance and so on, privacy, then find a better name, I say. Okay? Because so long as you keep that name, people will say, but there's a hard problem and you're not addressing it. Okay? So say robustly, those things don't exist. Maybe analogous things exist. But these analogous things don't pose a hard problem in the way that qualia do. Qualia pose a hard problem because of the way they've been conceptualized. Often it's an acquaintance essence, revealing relation to private and so on. So kind of be robust about it. And it says, when you discard Cartesian realism, you really must discard the show that would have gone on in the Cartesian theatre. So what he's saying is, for a materialist, physicalist, stop being quite a realist. Qualia only makes sense within a Cartesian framework. So what do the illusionists say? Do they say, what do they say going on? Do they say nothing's going on? No, of course they don't. They give an alternative account of what's going on. And this again is why I like the term illusion. What's going on when you witness an illusion? Let's say a theatrical illusion performed by a magician. A lot is going on. An awful lot is going on that has taken a lot of complex planning, the organization. It is much more complex than it looks. The effect is simple. The machinery that produces the effect is highly complex and hidden. And that's why I like the analogy, because what I think is going on is a lot of stuff, a lot of very complex stuff that is completely real, very important to us, but produces the effect, making us believe in a Cartesian theatre. Okay, so the effect is simple, the machinery is complex. But what's going on? Lots and lots and lots. And I'm just going to wave my hands wildly here at the neuroscience. There's a vast wave of neuronal microchanges. Vast, a tsunami of changes, which in turn produce or constitute changes at a grosser level, physiological changes, changes in heart rate. I'm talking about pain here. Changes in heart rate, breathing, hormone levels, all sorts of things. Psychological changes, changes in attention, perceptual set, emotion, desire, belief, semantic readiness, all sorts of things. A huge tsunami of changes comes over you. And you're going, behavioral changes, crying out, wincing, shifting position. The pain pushes and pulls you around physically. It hits you. This wave of stuff happens to you. Some of it's reflex, some of it's highly cognitive and complex. Reflective. Massive wave, tsunami of changes. That's pain. That's what I was saying. That's pain. That's what I say pain is. So where's the illusion? It's not that pain doesn't exist. My claim is that that's what pain is, that tsunami of effects. Okay, I'm not saying that's illusory. What's the illusion? Here's a suggestion. The illusion comes in when you have something like an introspective system that monitors those first order processes, those are hugely complex, that tsunami of effects. And you have introspective processes that monitor that for purposes of communication and control. So you can talk about what's happening to you. Tell other people about it. Tell them what that slap did to you. Okay? I mean, you'll show signs of it all right without introspectively monitoring it. You'll be wincing and displaying pain behavior. But if you can also introspect, you'll be able to just try to describe it, which is useful. Do it, talk about it offline. So what I suggest introspection does is it monitors those first order processes and generates simplified models of them, which then enable a raft of further reactions to your reactions. You can comment on them, you can describe them, you can think, you can make plans to avoid the thing that caused that first order raft of reactions. I touch that thing and it had that effect, I'll avoid touching it again. I don't mean just reinforcement learning. You can reflectively decide not to do it. You can warn other people not to do it because you know what it did to you. And one of these further reactions is there's the forming of beliefs and reports about qualia. So the idea is that qualia concepts, talking about the field of experience, is just a handy way of characterizing that massively complex first order reaction. You don't need to know all the details, far too complex to do that. So we just have these like recognitional concepts that just glob onto the overall shape of what's happening to you. And you say, it's like that. I was in that sort of state, the sort of state that you get when you taste this or touch that or somebody does that to you. And you can't really say much more about it because these concepts are not fine-grained enough. You can't talk about the activity in particular neural regions. You just say it's one of those kind of states I was in. I don't like it. I don't like those states. You don't like them. Okay, so it's a caricatured way of describing the immense complexity at the first order level. So here you see we have something that structurally is a bit like a Cartesian here. But crucially, so Dennett talks about that. I make no apologies for mentioning Dennett so often. He talks about it as a user illusion, the brain's perspective on its own activity, like the user interface on a computer desktop. Crucial point about this in this picture, the qualia are merely intentional objects. They're the objects of our beliefs and thoughts and reports. Okay. They're not actually instantiated. Illusion. Which isn't to say that the pain is illusory. The pain is perfectly real. It's all of this rich stuff. What's illusory is the simplistic notion of the feel, which we use to describe that complexity. The simplicity is illusory. Complexity is real. But crucially, of course, these imaginary things, all this doesn't have those features of quality, doesn't have the features of privacy, doesn't have the feature of being distinct from informational and reactive processes. It is a set of informational and reactive processes. It's not known with infallibly, with certainty. It doesn't reveal its essence. It precisely conceals its essence under the guise of qualia. That's the illusion in illusions. Okay, how much? 10 minutes?
Yeah, just 10 minutes.
Okay, so that's good. So that takes me to, I think, so here's a way of putting it. Consciousness as an engagement with the world. That's the right conception of consciousness. First order, rich first order engagement with the stimulus. How those going both ways. Information and reactions. Locking the subject onto the source of stimulation. Engaging with it. And then second order engagement with that first order engagement. Because it's being locked onto the world and then locked onto your own engagement with it so that you can talk about it. Our brains trick us into thinking and reacting as if they're not qualia. That's illusion. Okay. Qualia and intentional objects, I've said that already. Okay, now, does that view have negative ethical implications? Some people think it does. Some people think I'm saying that nobody's ever been in pain. Now, I hope none of you think that. But some people do. There's Galen Strawson. I spoke about Dennett's view. He does include me in the list of people who've subscribed to this view. It's good company as far as I'm concerned. Richard Rort is in there. Good people. Bless him. So he says again, it's right. Implication. I'm right. No one has ever really suffered, in spite of agonizing diseases, mental illness, murder, rape, famine, slavery, bereavement, torture, and genocide, and no one has ever caused anyone else pain. This is the great silliness. We must hope that it doesn't spread outside the academy or convince some future information technologist or roboticist who has great power over our lives. Elon Musk must not find out about illusionism. God knows what will happen. I'm sure he's sincere. I'm sure that's his view, but I hope you will confirm that I just regard that as a very superficial caricature of what I'm saying. I'm saying that qualia don't exist, but I'm saying that pain doesn't consist of qualia. That's not what pain is, okay? And he's just begging that question. So, yeah, illusionists don't deny the reality of pain or any other experience. We recognize when we're in pain, okay? Something's happening to me. It's horrible, I don't like it. Yes, that's real. Whatever's happening to you is completely real, and you don't like it, and you shouldn't want to cause it to anybody else. So, yes. The issue is whether you're conceptualizing it correctly in these Cartesian terms. And I'm suggesting that that's where you're going wrong. So illusionists, they don't deny the reality of pain. Sorry if I'm talking too quickly, but I'm aware that I'm in depression. They merely reject a certain picture of what experience is. And it's begging the question at issue to assume that experiences must involve a qualia show in a Cartesian theatre. That's the very issue. Illusionism may be wrong about that. Maybe it does involve that. But it's just begging the question to say that experience must involve that. That's the issue. So here's Dennett again. I don't deny the existence of consciousness. Of course, consciousness exists. It just isn't what most people think it is. As I've said many times, I do grant that Strawson expresses quite vividly a widespread conviction about what consciousness is. Might people, and Strawson in particular, be wrong about that? That's the issue. Yes, so when you're in a magic show, yes, there's something happening there on the stage. This guy's floating in the air. Something's happening, but maybe it's not quite what you think it is. Maybe he's not really levitating, as it seems. Maybe he's being hoisted by a complex construction of hidden wires behind the scenes. And in fact, that is what's happening. And that's from an exchange, magic illusions and zombies. I call it term illusionism, but Dennett has talked about illusion in this context for a long time, and I'm very, very happy to acknowledge my huge debt to him. So the suggestion is distinguish questions about the value of experience and questions about its nature. We can all agree on answers to the value questions. We all agree we can all tell when we're having a certain experience. We can tell when other people are having experiences pretty reliably. In fact, I think I can tell when others. Often I can tell when others are in pain pretty much as reliably as I can tell when I'm in pain. Perhaps better in some cases. And we can all agree that that's a bad state to be in. Another question, what exactly is happening in those cases? How do we conceptualize it? It's where the disagreement is. Okay, so this is why the slapping won't work. Illusionism is only relevant only to the nature questions. Okay, that's supposed to be simple. That's Thomas Rowlandson, an illustration of simple bodily pain. I'm not quite clear what the nature of the pain is, but they certainly look unhappy. I don't know if they're doing something you can't see that's happening. Anyway, okay, here's an objection. One that I guess Philip and Galen Strawson might be inclined to press, pains and other experiences matter ethically, they have ethical value, simply because they involve acquaintance with qualia. Okay. Qualia are the subjective essence of pain. It's what it is likeness. Without them, the pain would be just a mere mechanical process with no subjective significance at all. That huge tsunami of effects in itself means nothing. It's ethically neutral. It's only when you attach a qualia to it to be appreciated in the Cartesian theatre that it acquires ethical significance. That's, I think, maybe it's caricaturing, but I think that's what Philip thinks and Galen thinks. So we can call that the dependency claim, that ethical value depends on attaching qualia to these states. In response to that, it's going to be Dennett again. It's not clear. First of all, it's not clear that people accept that claim. It's not clear that people are phenomenal realists in the sense I've been outlining, that they believe in a Cartesian theatre. Quite easy to get them to do so, particularly if you line them up in a first year undergraduate philosophy class and badger them with thought experiments about inverted spectra and zombies and goodness knows what. You can get people to believe anything in a first year undergraduate philosophy class. So you can indoctrinate people into believing it. And maybe some people have arrived at it by the process of a private philosophical reflection. But how widespread it is, whether it's culturally specific and so on, these are matters for experimental philosophy, and I think it's fair to say that the evidence on that is the jury is still out. There's evidence on both sides. But even if people do accept it, nothing follows except that they may be wrong. To accept it, people used to think all sorts of. People used to think that people who are mentally ill were possessed by demons. So what? Interesting to know why they think it. Doesn't follow we should just go along with it. Maybe, and this is possible, I think, maybe being in pain just is undergoing a complex pattern of reactions. And when we talk about this state that I'm in and I don't like being in, that's the state that's there, that we're talking about. And maybe when we talk about what pain is like, we're just gesturing at the shape of that pattern of reactions. It's going to be a multi-dimensional pattern of reactions, varying on all sorts of different dimensions. Because I said, physiological, psychological, each one of those dividing into multiple different aspects, behavioral. And we're just gesturing at the shape of that. It's a stabbing pain. Yeah, that's producing a certain set of reactions, a stabbing pain. That's what it is. So I'm not producing, that's what it is a certain pattern of reaction. This is why there's no problem of psychophysical harmony, because the pain just is that pattern of reactions. Now, okay, Dennett on the vim of the dollar, lovely analogy, I mean, the best analogies anyone's ever come up with here. He says that Americans tend to think that a dollar bill has value. Everyone agrees that it has value, but Americans tend to think that the dollar has intrinsic value in a way that other currencies, like the euro or the yen or the pound or whatever, does. They're just bits of paper that you can exchange for stuff. And maybe they're convenient to have them in that country because if you give them to people, they'll give you stuff back. But it doesn't have real spending power like the dollar has. Of course, that's not true. But it expresses something important for the American. They have a real sense of the power of this greenback, okay? Because they use it all the time. They really sense what you can do with a greenback. And to them, it takes on the nature of a sort of essence, power in the thing itself, which they don't feel in other currencies because they're not accustomed to using those. It's a way of expressing their sense of the potency of the thing. Similarly, when we talk about qualia, when we talk about experience, we have a sense of what this means for us, this state I mean, what it's doing to me, how it's pushing me around in so many different directions, emotionally, cognitively, psychologically, behavior, all sorts of things that physically it's pushing me. I'm aware of all that potency and I label it the field. But it's not an intrinsic inner quality displayed in some private realm any more than the value of the dollar is some intrinsic essence. So illusionism doesn't require to stop thinking that pains matter ethically. Of course it doesn't. These are hugely important states. When you hurt someone, a huge amount of stuff happens to them. And that what's happening to them may be all kinds of negative dimensions to it. Not least that they don't like, they don't want it to continue. At most, it requires us to rethink why they matter. Just as understanding economics doesn't require you to stop thinking of the dollar as having value, but it may require you to stop thinking of it as having an intrinsic power, or diamonds as having intrinsic power. No, it's exchange value. It's what you can do with it. It's to reconceptualize why they matter. Their belief in the soul, doubtless, in the past, I'm sure lots of people thought that life had value, intrinsic value, only if the creature had a soul, and that if non-human animals didn't have a soul, they didn't matter. I mean, it's ascribed to Descartes, I don't know whether it's true. They thought that, you know, the idea was that if an animal doesn't have a soul, it's just a machine and it doesn't matter. I think, well, we got over that one. We've got over belief in the soul without thinking that no creatures without souls didn't matter ethically. That if we lack a soul, therefore we're just lumps of we're just biological machines whose existence doesn't matter. We're easily adjusted to that one. We just need to do it with this last remnant. Okay, so I don't think there are any negative ethical implications. Third part of the talk.
Okay, could I get you to maybe wrap up shortly? Just
Okay, I'll try. Let me just go quickly with it. Ethical implications. So I just want to mention two. Knowability. Realist perspective on this is that the show in the Cartesian theatre is private. It's for the subject only. Qualia can't be publicly detected. Caveat there about interactionist views, which I'm not going to expand on, but I'm acknowledging it. All we can do is theorize about the correlations between what happens in that private world and what happens in the public world mapped by neuroscience and psychology and cognitive psychology. The problem is that there's absolutely no consensus about these correlations. There's pretty much as widespread disagreement on this as there could possibly be. Some people think that the entire universe is conscious in this sense, in this phenomenal sense. Some people think that electrons are conscious in this sense. Some people think that every combination of particles, elementary particles, is conscious in this sense. For any and every position is available. There's no consensus, and of course, there are no empirical tests because you can't detect these things. It's important to remember here that qualia are very like other unobservables posited by science. They're not posited to explain observed effects, as say dark matter. It's not when we made these observations and we're not sure about the cause, we posit something as a cause of it. No, that's not how it's working with qualia. Qualia are not posited to explain observed effects. They're supposed to be observables themselves. In fact, possibly the primary observables, the only things that are directly observable. The problem is that they are private observables, a unique status in our picture of the world, a highly anomalous status. So it follows quite simply from that, if qualia are what make experiences matter, then we can't be sure which experiences matter. So perhaps our own, and maybe not even then, because after all, if we're going to detect our own qualia, we need some sort of, I don't know, I guess in our brains would need some sort of mechanism for detecting them. And why should it be easier to build a brain mechanism for detecting qualia than it is to build an artificial mechanism for detecting them? I mean, our brains are part of the public world. Okay, so if they're going to detect qualia, why can't we build an artificial machine that can detect qualia? You can't make qualia so inaccessible as this and still allow that it's unproblematic how we have access to them ourselves. Okay, you say it's acquaintance, just a word. So realism plus dependency tends to make us skeptics about suffering, or at least agnostics about it. We just don't know whether octopuses don't pain, even if we're happy that other humans are. Well, of course. So, and just the sheer oddness of locating value fundamental value is something that's systematically unknowable. What a strange thing to do. A strange attitude to take in economics, say, to locate the value of things in some essence that is not detectable. Okay, so the advantages of the illusionist perspective are just obvious there. The illusionist denies that experience has any component that is radically private. All the facts relevant to determine a creature's experiential state are publicly detectable in principle. Now, of course, they're contingently private. They're locked. Many of them are locked away inside this thing. And even though I've shaved my hair off, you know, it's still pretty hard to see in here. But I'm giving fairly good signs of them in behavior. Am I denying the subjectivity of experience? No, because we can distinguish two things we might mean by that. We might mean existing for the subject only, being radically private in that sense. I'm denying the existence of subjectivity in that sense, but I'm not denying the existence of something that expresses a personal response. When we say that something is subjective, often that's what we mean. My subjective opinion. I don't like it, that's my opinion. It's my subjective response. Experience is intensely subjective in that sense. It's all about my response to the world. It's all about this tsunami of reactions. Quickly, I'm getting there now. So that's one attraction. You don't have a problem with knowability. You don't have a problem about whether other creatures are conscious. Another problem is continuity. The point about a Cartesian theatre is that either is one or there isn't. The show in the theatre may be minimal, but there's either one there or there isn't. So, you know, in an octopus, the show may be very different from the show in our in a bat. So the show may be very different from the one in our Cartesian theatre, but there either is one or there isn't. In a fish, similarly, in an insect, similarly. There's either something there inside or there isn't. Consciousness is analogous to an inner light, which is either on or off. That means there's a radical discontinuity between creatures with qualia, Cartesian theatres with qualia, ones without them. So, no Cartesian theatre, no Cartesian theatre. And just probably late in evolution, you have the lights come on, and you've got to be in that privileged circle to matter. And I won't go into this, but I think that's true even almost outside this, because you have a problem of combination when it occurs. So you have this strange anthropocentric spotlight view that casts most of the rest of creation out, not into outer darkness, but into inner darkness. Okay, the illusionist view is much more liberal, inclusive. Consciousness is a complex pattern of effects, it's graded, it's multidimensional, not analogous to an inner light at all. As then it suggests it's more like fame in the brain, it's more a matter of the pattern of effects reaching a certain cumulative level that you're inclined to say, yes, that content was conscious, was really genuinely conscious, whereas the other ones didn't quite get to be famous enough. But there's no hard cut-off point. It's a vague notion. So there's no radical discontinuity. There's just a gradual increase in the complexity and the structure of these reactions. And we're going to need, therefore, new taxonomies for representing forms and degrees of consciousness. Very much agree with Olivia here. We're going to need multiple dimensions to measure consciousness. Absolute right. It's multidimensional. It's the only way we're going to be able to map this is in a multidimensional space, each dimension of which has many different creatures are located at many different points along it. And then the task is simply to identify the similarities and differences between human consciousness and other creatures using these new taxonomies. And then the ethical question, well, we address them in the light of that knowledge. We say, here's how their pain, here's some of their pain, here's what their structure of pain is like. This is what the human one is like. How much do you care about it? It's not sort of written down that, there's light on it matters, there's no light on it doesn't matter. Not like that. You just got to do enough investigation and then see how much you care. Same model goes for AIs, the same model goes for people with brain interest. Okay, there was a slide here to ask about whether there is still a discontinuity in my view. in that the illusion of qualia is discontinuous. I'll leave that one because the crucial point of observation here is don't think of the illusion of qualia as making the inner lights come on. That isn't the point. It's not a substitute theory of phenomenal consciousness. Okay, consciousness is accounted for at the first order level. And higher order stuff just enables reports about it. It doesn't make the inner lights come on. There are no inner lights in this view. Get away from that image. Okay, so just do the message, the last slide. Consciousness experiences complex patterns of sensitivity and reaction. They matter, and how they matter depends on the kind of sensitivities and reactions involved. No radically private facts. No sharp division between conscious creatures who matter and non-conscious ones who don't. We are not locked into private mental. I'm getting in my preaching mode now. We are not locked into private mental worlds, sealed off from each other. This is the liberation bit. We are all parts of the same world, single world, and we could, in principle, know everything. In principle, know everything about each other. To know whether a creature is suffering, we don't need to theorize about correlations between our shared public world and its hidden private world. We just need to study the creature very, very carefully. So that's the moral. Study your fellow creatures very, very carefully. So you can, while you wait for questions, you can decide whether you want to slap me.